So I was doing some testing for the upcoming Nightmare mode, where we need to put together a team of players for the ultimate challenge, taking on Calanthea at maximum difficulty. And so I wanted to go back and test a bunch of the team support abilities, and including in that is Willbreaker. And this surprisingly is super effective. I have made a list in the past and I'm working on updating it, and this comprises of all the different support effects the different weapons can give a team. And when you're looking at min-maxing like groups, and now we have a total of 10 players, we need to find out what powers are a must-have and whether or not you need that power in each party. For example, weak point shot, you have to have one in each party, as it will only benefit the 6 players in that party and not the other 6 in the Vanguard party. However, when I went and tested Willbreaker, I found this thing to be far more effective than I ever thought it would be. It's kind of crazy. Maybe some of you already know, and of course, many tank players would already be using it. However, the duration is only 6 seconds, and it's very unlikely that people are really making the most of it. You're going to want to have like 2 of them in a party, or on somebody with a ton of cooldown. Maybe crossbow greatsword. So I want to show you my test data and how effective this thing really is. I'll show you so you could do this for yourself too. Ideally you have a dagger, you will of course need the greatsword, and you will use camouflage cloak to guaranteed get a crit on your next attack. As you can see, you gain a massive amount of critical hit chance, so you basically have 99.99% that you will critically hit on your next attack, which means you can much more reliably test this actual damage values. So if you look at a dummy and you test Willbreaker, you will find absolutely 0 effect. This thing will not increase the damage of your attacks. You can see you can put the debuff on, it does show, but it will do absolutely nothing. These dummies do not have defense. You can see my test data right here. The target is a dummy, and we should be hitting in-game 2,745 as a critical hit. We can use Willbreaker, we can enter stealth, and we can use brutal incision, and we get that 2,745 seen in game, and then we calculate it. I have shared in previous videos. You can check this one to be exact, and it explains the damage calculator. With it, we can input the defense value of our target. So if that's currently 0, with these stats, these are the only relevant ones for this test, we find this is the exact amount of damage we're dealing, so we can see that checks out. So when we actually go and include defense, we can then find a proper result. So let's go to an enemy that's relevant that has defense. We can go open world area, level 55 mob. We make sure we have no species damage. If we did, we're targeting constructs, we'd have to make sure to include that here. My build is very minimal to reduce the amount of different stats we have to make sure that it's very easy to calculate just based on these numbers. The 29% critical damage here is 20% from the skill itself. That includes in its hit, and then 9% here from artifacts. So we go to a mob, we do the test just going in stealth, then brutal incision, and we get our base value, 1,921. Now when we do use Willbreaker at green, so that should just reduce the target's defense by 300, currently have it at max. I could simply swap this one here with a skill, and we can see it's now 300. So we go to our target, we cast Willbreaker, we enter stealth, we make sure the debuff's on the target, and then cast brutal incision. 2,080. Exactly what checks out here with what we would calculate with the target having 1,181 defense, with a defense divider as this. You can check the math here, 1,181 defense, willpower 300, and we can see that's going to be minus 300 from the original target's defense, and we can see 2,080. Exactly what we're seeing in game, meaning willpower works and is actually giving us a pretty decent 8.38% damage again against that target. And considering that's for every single player who attacks this guy, that's crazy huge. I'll show my test results on that later to confirm it can be anybody. But what I did then was simply upgrade the skill a few levels, test again, because that increases the amount of defense that we're going to reduce our target by. The next level here was 600. We can swap it with like a level 1 skill here on purple, and now it has 600. We'll just go to a different area, but be sure you are targeting monsters that are tagged as level 55. For this defense value is dependent on the level of the target. We'll get into that, and I will show some tests against level 50 enemies. But again, we can do the test with and without Willbreaker. So with Willbreaker, casting it, we got the debuff. We actually didn't that time because these enemies have apparently some weaken resist, and there is a chance then you don't land it. So I simply wait. We can cast another Willbreaker, enter stealth, then brutal incision, 2267. This is what we're seeing here at 600 defense reduction, and that does check out with the math, as you can see. That's over 18% damage gain now, and the skill isn't maxed out yet. Let's get that thing upgraded all the way to level 5, and it will reduce the defense by 720. You can already see how effective this thing is going to be. We'll cast that Willbreaker, successfully apply the debuff, enter stealth, use brutal incision, 2352. Checking that here, we can see this is the value we are indeed getting with 720 defense from our Willbreaker. There you go. This is the maximum effect of Willbreaker. Over 22.7% damage gain. It's kind of crazy. An absolutely underrated skill. I don't believe there's anything else that can provide as much damage to the team, other than maybe Deadly Marker due to the cooldown reduction it provides everybody. You could try and argue that Weak Point Shot giving 24% critical damage can be good, but no, this thing is getting diminished by already having a significant amount of critical damage depending on your class, and along with this not being overly reliable depending on the fight. You go into the new raid, second boss, they barely do any fury attacks and you're barely getting any benefit from this. Willbreaker has zero dependency on what mechanics the bosses are doing. You can simply cast this and you gain that huge damage increase. And again, not just for yourself, but for everybody who targets it. And then not just for your party members either, like a lot of the other buffs. I went down into the Temple of Truth with Groza right here. I wasn't on a call this time around, so I invited him to the party, and then I will leave the party, and that's the exact moment he will cast Willbreaker on our target, and then I will use my stealth and brutal incision, not using my Willbreaker. And we can then compare the values from when I do use Willbreaker to when Groza has used Willbreaker. We can see 697. Remember that value. The other hit was offhand attack. I did test this one on a different character, and you can see how the offhand base attack damage is higher than my main damage attacks. That's why the offhand attack damage will show as higher. But to prove that we get the same damage value when we use Willbreaker, and to compare our value without Willbreaker, we can jump to Temple of Truth alone. This character does not have species damage boost against constructs. We cast Willbreaker, we enter stealth, we use brutal incision, we can see 697, exactly what we got with Groza, who applied his Willbreaker to this golem. So we can see it's the same value, you're getting the buff while not being in the party of the caster. I will show you the damage then without Willbreaker. We enter stealth and we use brutal incision, 561. That's without Willbreaker. We look at the math on this, and we can indeed see it's a 720 defense reduction from 1177. For some reason, there's a slight defense difference when you're going from a level 50 character against level 55 mobs to a level 55 character against level 55 mobs. As you can see that value just here. But we can indeed see the difference between those numbers with and without Willbreaker is again still over a 22% damage gain. It's absolutely huge, and it's for everybody who attacks the target. So many of us, I feel, have just overlooked the sheer effectiveness of this. Defense reduction is absolutely huge, and this 720 is kind of ridiculous in PvE. With it only having a 6-second duration and it being very unlikely your build can maintain the debuff all the time, it can be very advantageous to have multiple greatsword users in the group to maintain this as much as possible on your target. It can be hard if those greatsword users are in different parties because you won't be able to see that debuff applied, but I believe if you are in the same party you may see it, and thus you can stagger that debuff properly. In doing so, you will improve your team's damage massively. Again, over 22% is crazy for just one ability. That's 22.78% with level 55 mobs. Because again, you have to test each mob differently. If they have a level 55 tag, then they will have 1,181 defense, with a defense divider of 2,750. When you're looking at level 50 mobs, as we tested here in a 2-star dungeon, with 600 defense on Willbreaker and 720, you can see the defense divider still remains the same, but the actual defense of the target goes to 1,080. They simply have less defense, and you will find that across all the lower levels of targets. The lower level they are, the less defense they have. Makes sense, but that also means that there's going to come a certain point where reducing 720 defense gets irrelevant. Like if they only have 200 defense, then this becomes not nearly as effective. However, in the current level, it is super effective. And there are other abilities which reduce defense. For example, Destructive Fang can be leveled up all the way to 5. It reduces it by up to 152. If you look at the math from that, and I'm sure you can go and test it just as I did here, that would be over a 4% damage gain. And there's also the new wand, the upgraded Tevent core, reducing the target's defense by 10%. So this would be equal to 10% of this value. So multiplied by 0.1, 118 in this case, which is over a 3% damage gain. And that's again for everybody targeting that target. I haven't tested it, but if it's like Willbreaker, where reducing the enemy's stats actually improves the damage of everybody targeting that target, then those bonuses are still pretty huge. I will go on to confirm them along with Destructive Fang, but as it stands, Willbreaker, I feel, is a completely underrated power that is a crazy damage improvement to the team. With this in mind, I would definitely recommend having 2 greatsword users, staggering that debuff and improving everybody's damage by over 22%, getting you through those boss fights much faster. This is again a step in the direction of compiling my ideal, my perfect nightmare raid group. Not that you will always get the opportunity to create those kind of groups, but it's interesting to see what would fit best together, what would synergize best to give you the highest opportunity of succeeding. So thanks all for watching. I hope this was interesting. A special thank you to the support of my channel members, and we'll see you guys around. Goodbye for now. And just to be clear, this defense reduction is independent of any of your other stats. You could have 100% critical damage and you'd still gain the same amount of damage. 200% monster damage bonus, still the same increase. 1,000 skill damage boost, 1,000 species damage boost, 1,000 max weapon damage. All have no effect on the damage gain as it's a complete independent multiplier. The lower you can reduce the target's defense, the more damage gain it will be for you and everybody targeting that target.